about leadership capital, and I'm excited that Roger here is here. He's the treasurer at our church, and he's had front row seat to every change that we've made over the last 10 years, and really been one of the champions. And I mean, just to honor him, he's one of the guys that in the harder days called me and had questions and said, hey, we got to handle this differently, or would get clarity when he needed it. But today is one of the go-to people that if we're introducing a change or if I'm wrestling with something, I'll float it by him first and get his take on it. And so that just takes time, building those relationships. And I definitely learned the hard way. Many of you know my story, but I came in not expecting to be a lead pastor, not expecting to lead change. One thing that was on my side that others don't have all the time is that our church had momentum. And so we were growing by 200 people a year. However, we were going through major transition. In 2014, Pastor Doug had gone to North Central, and Terry Parkman and Aaron, two established pastors, had gone to other churches. They left on the same weekend and resigned at the same board meeting. And we had a pastor who passed away at 60 years old that same year, and Janae and I were married 3 months, and she had just graduated from physical therapy school, and we were kind of launched into, on one hand, God speaking to us and knowing we were called to lead the church, but on the other hand, really feeling like the two ponies that we have to ride right now are, one, that we've been in this church 2 years, and we've been able to be kind of like princes in this land and love on people. But then also that the church just had some momentum that we were able to build on. But every time that a leader comes in or a leader's trying to initiate change, there's always, every faction in the church reveals itself, right? Because you have people who care about certain things, who want to talk about those things. And so the moment that I started leading the church, I realized I have a little leadership capital in the bank because I've been on staff at this church for a little while. But I'm a new leader. I'm 28 years old. I was probably the most excited person on the history of the planet to say I can't wait till I'm 30. So I can at least tell the church, like, I'm in my 30s now, not my 20s anymore, and just the credibility of being in your 30s. But just realizing that there was quite a bit at risk, and still the church was changing fast, and there was good problems that we had that needed to be changed. And so I want to talk a little bit about that. I'm going to use kind of the illustration of leadership capital and maybe the different situations that you're in or that you're experiencing in your church. And I had somebody say something to me in February, and we were talking about just addressing issues in the church and issues in culture, and he said, well, you always have to remember that your role as the senior leader in the church is that you're the chief disruptor. And I was like, oh, I don't like that. I'm more of a harmony person. I don't like to create disruption unless I have a conviction or a doctrinal issue where I know I need to create it. And he said, but you have to be the one that leads the church out into what God is saying, what God is doing. You need to be disruptive in the way you cast vision, in the way you challenge people. You can never delegate that and hope somebody else in your church will have the hard conversation. Somebody else will say the hard piece of vision. Somebody else will address something that you're supposed to address. He said you have to embrace the role of being a chief disruptor. And I think pastors do that sometimes in constructive ways and sometimes in very destructive ways. And I think, especially in my initial years, I did that in some constructive ways and in some in destructive ways, where I didn't know how to initiate change. I was scared of hard conversations. And part of that is what I've had to work through, either through counseling or figure out, man, why do I not want to have this conversation that I know that I need to have? And going on a journey with my own dad of, figuring out our relationship, because when I was being raised, he wouldn't say anything, and then he would explode volcanically. And I always felt that with older men in my life, that, oh man, there's always a building tension, and whoever shouts the loudest is going to win, and realizing, no, there's a better way through conflict than that way. And I think for pastors, this is huge, that we are processing leadership decisions through our family of origin, and we're expecting people around us to respond in healthy ways when we're not leading in healthy ways. And so I always, in sessions like this, I advocate for having a counselor, having a coach, having people that are speaking into your process, having somebody in your life who can say, hey, you're trying to make a change, but you're leading in a deficient way that's actually harming people, it's actually hurting people, you're avoiding conversations, and allowing somebody to speak into that so that even when you bring change, you can bring it with unity when possible. And I say when possible, I think I said when possible in the description, because there are some people that no matter what change you bring, they're not going to come with you. Like pruning is biblical, right? And it's painful, nobody likes it, but there's people that I think when I first started leading the church, they had an agenda in their mind of what they hoped that I would either bring back from the past or what I would never let go of. And they were slowly disappointed over time when I didn't make those changes or when I didn't bring those things back. And you're always going to be disappointing people, and they're either going to cope and realize like, okay, the church is going a different direction than I hoped, and you're giving them ways to deal with that, or they're going to step out and they're going to say, I don't think this can be my church anymore. You know, and there's some great people that were a part of Evangel's history that now go to Capital Christian. You know, and I'm like, Dan Kent is a great pastor. That's a great church. God bless you. I hope you grow and you thrive. You know, there's some people who stepped out of our church and go to Ron Ingot's church. And I've always thought when I am making change and there's pruning that happens, it's not my job to try to keep everybody, but it is my job to keep every bridge open. And so one thing that I won't do is I won't fight with people to stay, because I'm giving them leverage by saying, okay, have whatever you want as long as you stay, but I'm never going to burn the bridge. Because so many people that leave upset about something will come back around a couple of years later and say, hey, I've had a change of heart, or God has done something in me. And so I just always try to say, I can't control what people do, but I don't burn bridges. Like I try to keep the bridge open to people whenever it's possible, in my strength. But you will, anytime you bring change, you have to be willing to say, you know what, I'm willing to prune so that we can grow. And so there's a lot of people now that say, wow, look at what Evangel has done, look at the number of people that are being reached, you know, and people love that result, but they still complained about every change and every difficulty along the way, right? And so we love to see what God is doing, but you know, as leaders, that every victory comes with sackcloth and ashes. And as a leader, we have to build a tolerance to, I know that I'm about to disrupt. I know that I'm about to spend some leadership capital, and I'm going to have less money in the bank than I did before, but I'm believing that this investment is, I've prayed, God is leading me, it's what He's called us to do as a church, and it's going to reap a harvest. Now, there's a constructive way to do that, and then there's a destructive way to do that, which is, Lord, you've called me to lead these people, but I don't feel like your Spirit is going with me, so I'm just going to torch the place, you know, and burn it all down, and I'm going to have destructive conversations with people, or I'm going to just avoid the people I don't want to talk to, and to be destructive in the way that we actually lead people in vision. And so that's a little bit of what I'm going to talk about in just how to lead people in vision. I think part of what we have to understand as leaders is that every strategy that we've ever implemented in our church has a lifespan. So people introduce, you know, Carl George was the guy back in the day. Troy Jones has been here. Scott Wilson is here. Like every strategy in the church has a lifespan. And sometimes what people don't understand or they fail to grab onto is the reality that the model that they've loved and grown accustomed to is on the tail end of its lifespan, right? And nobody really loves the idea of death. We don't love the idea of getting older in our lives. We don't love the idea of something that we love getting older. We don't love our dog getting older. But there's a reality that every strategy has a lifespan. And it's the job of the leader to look at everything that I'm doing as a leader, everything we're doing as a church, and saying what in our church is in a season of spring and summer, and it's bringing life and growth to the church. And you have to also be the first to admit what is in a season of fall or winter. And if it's in a season of fall or winter, then I have a job. And that job is either to declare time of death, right? Or to give something a facelift so it begins to look like it's in spring or summer again. And so it's your job as a leader or as a leadership team or with your board to sit down and really assess everything we're doing as the church. And to say, what is bringing life to the church? Are we giving resources to that? And what maybe are we giving resources to that isn't bringing life to the church? And we need to either give it a facelift or we need to declare a time of death. But here's what happens in a lot of churches. We don't have that conversation. And so let's say, I think Pastor Scott talks about this in one of his videos on RSG University, but let's say that the vision of the church is we're going to worship God in spirit and in truth, right? We could all agree in our churches, we want people to worship God in spirit and in truth. And so that's the vision, right? But what happens many times is we take one method to accomplishing that vision, and we never reinvent the vision. We never admit what is maybe in fall or winter, and we hang on to the same method of accomplishing that vision for far longer than we should have held on to it. And pretty soon, when we don't say, hey, this method of leading people in worship, this method is in fall or winter, and we don't admit that, all of a sudden we give way to nostalgia in our church, and we begin to just do things that we've always done because of the way it makes people feel. Yeah. And when I say the way it makes people feel, I'm not talking about the new person in your church. I'm talking about the nostalgia that generations who have come to our churches love and what they feel, and we begin to live in a state of nostalgia, right? And so, congregational worship, like people will fight for this. Like, I want singing in our church where we can hear the harmonies and I can hear everybody's voice, right? Hymnals. The idea of hymnals, was to put all the songs on paper so that everybody could have access to the words. And then we moved on from hymnals to, and I was the projector kid at Elgin Assembly of God. Yeah, like putting the new slide and moving it up on the projector to words on a screen, and we make it about the method. And we say, but I love projectors. I love the way that the words move along with the song, or I love hymnals because I love the smell, and I love singing 4 different verses or whatever it is. I mean, genuinely, and we fall in love with the nostalgia of a method, and we lose sight of the vision, and pretty soon we're executing a method that is not actually moving people into the vision.
Right, yeah, that's good.
And nostalgia is happening in our churches, and we're singing songs, but we're not actually accomplishing the method. And so it's the job of the leader to look at everything we're doing and saying, hey, and my mom always tells me, Josh, just because it's a little bit traditional doesn't mean you have to blow it up. And I'm like, thank you, Mom. Like, I receive that, and I understand that. But I do think everything has to be submitted. Everything we do has to be submitted and say, is this accomplishing the vision for why it was originally created? Or is it just a method that we've held on to out of nostalgia? And we don't get to just declare that as pastors. We need to lead people in that. And lead people. And it comes at a cost, right? Because if we don't do it, then the one person who's lost is gonna walk into our church, and they're gonna feel like they entered into a high school reunion from the class of 1986, and they don't belong there. Rather than walking into something where they are welcome, they are the guests, they're of first importance when they walk into the building, because aren't they? Like, if somebody walks in who does not know Jesus, are they not the most important person in the room outside of Jesus in that moment? Yeah. To give them the opportunity to cross over. But we have to teach our churches. And we have to help people walk through and understand that this is who we are as a church. And so, when it comes to making change, how can you do it with unity? So my story is entirely different today than it was as a 28-year-old guy who was newly married, who didn't have a lot of leadership capital in the church. And so one of the decisions I made early on in the church that I think was the right decision, maybe not done the right way, was we decided to stop having the choir. So at Evangel, we had 3 different services. One was traditional, one was middle of the road, and then one was contemporary, right? And then the contemporary or modern service started taking over. It was like the teenager in the house that was eating all the food, taking all the resources. It was growing at this huge rate, and we said, okay, this teenager is going to have to take over 2 services now because we can't contain what's happening in one service. So we got rid of the the middle of the road service, and then we had a traditional service, and we had 2 more modern services. And when I stepped in, when Pastor Doug was leaving, he looked at me and he said 2 things. And I think he was right at that moment with what was happening. He said, number 1, you're not the next pastor of this church. And I said, praise God. I just want to serve whoever does come in and carry that burden. And he said, number 2, whoever preaches that traditional service is going to have to continue to put on the suit and tie and give that generation what they need. And so I began to preach and lead, and I think what he said was true in the context and the time that he said it. So then I stepped into leadership, and somebody asked me at the meeting, they said, are you going to continue to do the traditional service? And I thank God today that I gave the answer that I gave, that he gave me the wisdom in that moment to say, I will continue to do it as long as we're still reaching people and baptizing people out of that service. But if the vision isn't being accomplished, then we're going to change our method. And so over the course of time, it just became apparent that service began to dwindle because people wanted to go to church where their grandkids were getting saved, you know? And it began to dwindle, and pretty soon it got under 100, and we had to just say, friends, I love you, but we have to take the resource of my time and energy and this church's time and energy, and we have to give it to where souls are being won. Now, I didn't really have the capital to make some of those decisions. There are people that are in the church that were twice my age, you know, who have been on the board as long as I've been alive, people who had whatever, you know, a lot more stake in the game than I did coming up to that point. And I remember sitting with somebody from that choir, and he just made a very, and he's not here today, he's passed away, but he said, Josh, you're just going to have to realize that the people who love the choir the most are the people that are in the choir. And it was like he had realized that a change needed to happen before I was willing to admit that a change needed to happen. And I realized I didn't have the capital myself to make a decision like that, but if I begin to go to people and say, hey, here's something that I'm thinking about, here's the vision, if we don't do this, we could do that. And I didn't have the capital to just stand in front of the church and say, here's what we're going to do, I'm the pastor, we're all going that direction. You know, I would say today, after leading the church for 8 years, after coming through a $16.4 million building project and owing less than $5 million, that God has given us capital where there's a lot of things I can just stand up on the stage and say, here's what we're doing, and people go, all right, praise God. We just moved Janae into a co-lead pastor role on Sunday. We didn't even talk about it from the stage. Her title just changed on the screen because there's a different amount of leadership capital that I have, that our elders have today, than I had when I first started. And I think a lot of pastors miss it because we don't realize that. We walk in thinking we have all this capital in the bank, maybe because we're just the pastor and we get to wear that hat, and so I can do whatever I want. God has told me. I went up on the mountain. God spoke to Moses. I came down off the mountain, and now we're going to do what I said. And we burn a lot of bridges, right? But it's about understanding how much capital you have at any given moment. If you make a big decision, you make a big change, you realize I spent some capital on that change, and now I need to build some more capital before I implement another one. Otherwise, churches and boards get this attitude that, well, the pastor comes, he's here for 3 to 5 years, he blows everything up with his new strategy, and then a new pastor comes and he has a different strategy and he blows everything up, and pretty soon boards and churches and generations hold very tightly to their method, and the pastor gets no permission. And so it's our job to help churches overcome that by continuing to build leadership capital. So I would say number 1 is assess where you are in your leadership capital journey. Because there's some that you're just in a season where you need to build capital. And I'm going to tell you what that looks like in a second. But there's others where you're sitting on a lot of capital. And God has called you to lead. And it's time to spend, not just accumulate. I'm a saver in our family, where I'm like, Janae, she's like, how much does our emergency fund need to be? And I'm like, how much could our emergency, like, what could it be? How much could we save, you know? And I'm that way, but you have to kind of understand, like, am I sitting on a lot of capital and I need to make a spend for the kingdom of God because forceful people lay hold of the kingdom of God? Or am I living paycheck to paycheck on capital right now, and every decision I make, I need to make the decision, implement the change, and then I got to build some capital back before I make the next one, and I got to keep a pulse on my church. How do I do that? I don't accept every criticism that comes my way. For a lot of years, people would say something like, Pastor Josh, I think we need to be careful about that decision because I'm just hearing from a lot of people that They don't like that decision. And eventually that conversation has to turn into, who are you hearing from, right?
That's right.
Because sometimes it's one or two people that are the tail wagging the dog in the church. And you need to really hone in and just say, you know what, I know that this person and this person and this person are passionate about that, but they have not been called by God to lead this church. They've been called by themselves to have an opinion. And we have to elevate out of that. And we have to think, what is God calling me to do as a leader? What is God calling us to do as leadership? And how are we actually going to move that vision forward? And so assessing the capital that you have. So when I hear that things are happening or people don't like a change in the church, or if somebody comes to me and says, hey, I'm hearing a lot about this or that, which I rely on people like Roger or our elders or staff members that people talk to, but they won't talk to me about it. And just saying, hey, I need you to be an informant, I need you to let me know what's going on, because people won't always tell me about it, they'll go to somebody else. And then I ask this question: is this feedback coming from one person, or is it coming from a cross-section of the church? And by cross-section, I mean not just one small group that got talking on a Thursday night and got upset about something. I can handle that separately, but is it coming cross-generationally? Is this feedback coming from a cross-section of people, either generationally or ethnically, or where is this feedback coming from? And if it's coming from different subgroups within the church, then I back up and say, man, okay, I spent some capital there on that decision, or people are frustrated over what we're doing, and I either need to get in and fix the decision, or I need to get in and actually just address it and speak to the culture and speak to what we're trying to do and reiterate that until people are able to get on board, right? So there's always going to be negative feedback to any change, because people love to protect what they know, and they're comfortable with what they know. And some people renovate their houses every 5 years that they live in. Other people live in the same home, with the same paint and the same trim that they've lived in for 45 years, and they want their church the same way, right? And that's okay, but we just have to help people to move forward in that conversation. So I don't always respond to criticism or complaints, but I try to identify, is this coming from a cross-section of people? Is it happening across the church? And so when it comes time to make change, how can I actually do it with unity? So number one is get out of leadership debt. So get out of leadership debt. There's a few ways to get out of leadership debt. One of the best ways to get out of leadership debt is what I talked about in the preaching breakout, and that is to get up every single Sunday and tell your people how your church is winning. So rather than just getting up and saying, we're making this change, we're going to do this, you're saying, I'm withdrawing money, I'm withdrawing capital. You're getting up every single weekend and telling your people, how is the church winning right now? So if we have a record number of people come to Easter, what I want the next weekend is I want the entire church clapping about the fact that a record number of people came to Easter. So when's the last time that your church clapped about something that God did in your church? When's the last time that people just were excited about a story that you told about something God is doing in the church? So I take 5 minutes at the beginning of every message to either tell people about something exciting that's coming up, or to tell them how our church is winning. 5 minutes to celebrate our people, or I call out somebody on stage, or somebody who is serving in a way that is just setting, like I look at them and I say, you know what, right now Josh, he is leading in our church the way I want everybody in our church to lead, so I'm going to celebrate him. I'm going to set the culture by saying what he's doing, so everybody goes, oh, that's how you win here. Like, that's what matters here in this house. Or I'm going to tell a story of somebody's life being transformed. The lady who walked up to me in Space Aliens and said, Pastor Josh, I'm a server here and I need to keep working, but I wanted to tell you that I've been coming to your church for 5 months, and ever since I started coming, I've been sober for the first time in my life.
That's awesome.
Hey, by the way, I ran into her again last week, and now it's been 9 months.
Wow.
Like, our church needs to hear that, right? They need to hear the stories of what God is doing. I need the prayer teams that are praying on the front altar to tell me the miracles that God is doing, so that the church knows, man, it's not just Pastor Josh's preaching point every week. Like, people that weren't able to have a child got pregnant last year because we prayed, or they were able to foster, they were able to adopt. And that builds leadership capital for a pastor. It's not manipulation. There is momentum in your church. It's just that you're not giving voice to it. You're not giving life to it. You're not letting people know that it's happening. And so we started an email thread. We have a different communication channel that our staff uses. And I'm like, every time there is a win, every time somebody is healed, every time somebody shares with a coworker, I need you to put it in there so I know how our church is winning. Because if I don't know, I'm not going to talk to people about it. And so one of the best ways to build leadership capital in our church is just to tell people, how is the church winning right now? And do it every week. Do it incessantly. Put it at the front of any email that you're sending out to the whole church. Let them know what it is that's happening. I just wrote win, win, win. Let people know how the church is winning. I would say the second way to build leadership capital is to build it individually or personally before you try to build it corporately. So when I first started, and this has changed for me, but when I first started, we had a church that was still growing. It was a large church. As you heard me tell at the beginning, we were without 4 of our pastors that had been there just a few months before, plus Pastor Doug's wife, Vicki, who is also a huge part of our staff. And it was down to about 3 of us, you know, and then a couple people that were working other jobs, and we said, hey, by the way, will you also be our kids pastor, you know, on top of that in the meantime? And there wasn't a lot of time to go around and to do things, and so I just went to my assistant and I said, I cannot meet with everybody, but I know I'm in a season where I need to build credibility with people, and so get as many people on my schedule as you can. Here's my slots where I can meet with them. If I'm full, you got to push into the next week. And I said, but if anybody walks in who's a member or a heritage member of this church, then I need you to get them in as soon as possible. Even if it's a walk-in, I want to try to take it, because I know the people that have been around our church for 20, 30, 40 years, they're wondering what I'm going to do. They're feeling a little uneasy. They don't know exactly where things are going. And so I'm going to prioritize them. And so I did that. So people would walk in and they'd have a complaint about something or something they were hoping I would change. And I would let them air that out and I would talk to them about it on a personal level. On the flip side, there's a couple older ladies in the church, great ladies, they're still a part of the church, but they were writing on Facebook like, man, did you hear how loud the worship was at Evangel this weekend? Or I wish we sang this song rather than these redundant choruses that say the same words over and over. And I would lovingly catch them that Sunday and say, hey, I need you to come in this week and meet with me. And they would walk in, and one of them walked in, and the moment she walked in my door, she put her hands over her mouth and she goes, and she started crying and she goes, Pastor Josh, I'm so sorry for what I said. And I was like, you're not in trouble, but we're not in unity, and I need us to be in unity. And so can we just talk about what you said, and can I give you my heart on why I did what I did? And I still do this today. I had a lady who's a longtime member of our church who the Ukraine war broke out on a Thursday. I didn't address it that Sunday because we were going to do something bigger with Convoy Hope the next Sunday, and she was deeply offended that I never said anything about Ukraine. And I said, hey, I need you to come in. I need you to come in. We need to talk about this. And she came in, immediately started crying, and she said, hey, I'm sorry, my sister died last week or a couple weeks ago, and I've just not been the same. And this just, you know, and I said, that's okay, but she's been in our church a long time, and so I made space for her. And do you know how much capital that wins? They know how busy I am. I mean, that's the first thing they say is, I know you don't have time, you know, whatever. No, I have time for you. And just being wise in those moments of, I can't meet with everybody. There's no way. I openly tell people that. If I took a 1-hour appointment with every person in this church, it would take me 30 years to do it, you know? But this moment matters. And so I'm going to build that capital with people individually before I stand on a stage and try to build it or try to spend it corporately. Now it's totally different. When somebody calls, we can handle it totally different unless there's a need that comes up and I say, no, I need to speak into that one, I need to meet with that person. But things get handled other ways. I honestly think there's a different amount of credibility that a pastor gets after 4 or 5 years than the first 3 to 4 years, where you get out of this honeymoon period, you get out of the people that are disappointed in you, that you didn't do what they hoped that you would do, and there's just a credibility that comes with longevity that Janae and I are enjoying in a deep way right now, but wasn't there in the first couple of years. So build that personal leadership capital with people. The other way that you do this is when you're going to make a big decision, you identify who are the key stakeholders. So our church is navigating some big decisions right now, and there's decisions that many times before I go to the elders, I will bring Roger in, I'll bring Jason in and say, here's what I'm thinking, here's what I'm going. Do you have thoughts on that? You know, can you give me guidance, or Dan will meet with them, or somebody to say, hey, who are the key players, and can they speak in to what we're about to do before we actually do it. Another way, when you're in leadership debt, to overcome that is the parallel making sense? Leadership capital? Okay, so the other way is partnership and loans, and let me tell you what I mean by that. There's going to be moments where you make decisions and you realize I went into debt on that decision, but it was the right decision. When we made the choir decision and we didn't have a choir anymore, I went into leadership debt in that decision, and I knew it. And I knew I could, but I knew, hey, if I take out a loan here, I can do something new in that space, and it's going to create the income or the capital that I want in the future, right? Because right now I can't change the service if I don't change the choir, and the service can't grow unless I change it. But 6 or 9 months from now, when we're in 3 services that are all this style, and we've grown by a bunch of people, and giving has been impacted, and there's more stories, that loan is going to pay off, right? And so there are some moments where you have to calculate and say, I know I don't necessarily have the credibility to make this change right now, but I'm going to do it. It's not going to cost me everything I own. Like, I'm conscious of how much I'm spending, but I know if I make this change, it's going to bring a harvest later, and it's going to justify that decision. We're making a major decision right now about moving away from our Wednesday nights and doing them totally differently than we've ever done before. Pastor Kyle, our kids pastor, he was in my office and he goes, this is the biggest decision I've made since I've gotten here. And so my response to him was, hey, I see you've written this letter to parents letting them know about that decision. And I looked at Pastor Bryce and I said, one of our names needs to be on this too. So it's not just Kyle, but it's also Pastor Bryce, Senior Associate Pastor, Pastor Josh, Lead Pastor, because we're going to co-sign. You know, this is going to be a partnership leadership withdrawal for the parents that are going to be hurting over this decision. I'm not just going to let it fall on Pastor Kyle. I'm going to spend some of my capital on the change that he needs to make, because team success is greater than personal success, right? And for our team to win, we all have to be in on the decision. And so we do that across the church. If somebody is making a decision, if Pastor Isaac with youth has to make a decision, he feels like, man, this is a big one, it's going to negatively impact people, then I'm going to give him some of my capital. I'm going to address it on a Sunday, or I'm going to send the letter myself and let him glean off of the leadership capital that I have, because he doesn't get a preaching point every Sunday with the whole church where he's building capital all the time. And so I'm going to lend that to him and help move that decision forward. Yeah.
Tied in with that, maybe you want to cover this, or if you're going to cover it at all, but my interest would be too, where, you're talking a lot about unity across the church, but how about unity within your staff? I mean, specifically keeping that together, because that's so important too. So,
yeah, it's really easy for me to talk out of my present context.
yeah, I don't want to
And
throw
I'm
you off.
trying to back up a little bit and just say,
Okay.
you know, what did it look like originally? Because now I talk to our staff very openly, and I'm like, hey, God has called you here. Like, he either has to call you to this pastor, but I also hope that he calls you to this church and these people, you know, that you're not just here to serve me, but you're here to serve the church and the people. But I tell our staff, you know, you're a staff member at this church, and that means that you have to have a right attitude. Like, you have to have the right culture and character and chemistry to be on this team, but you also have to get results. Like, you have to produce in your job and in your position. And part of what we do as a team, part of your production, is that we glorify God and we honor people. And our elders are in unity. I'm in unity with our elders. Our leadership team is in unity. So you got to come along. Pastor Scott says, you got to grow or you got to go. You know, it's got to be one way or the other. And so now I press that a little bit more in play. If you can't come under alignment with where we're going, then you have to find somewhere where you can be in unity and you can be in harmony with leadership, with the Spirit of God, because there's no anointing, you know, there's no blessing if you're not. And so you have to be able to come under that. man, so I've had situations even in the last year where maybe I have a vision for something, and as the lead pastor of a church of 55 or more staff, I felt like somebody's not in line with what we want to do, or they want to do it their own way. And the line that we've recently started just coaching the staff on is, if I can't teach you, or if you're too insecure for me to teach you, then I can't coach you. And if I can't coach you, then I can't use you.
Okay.
And so just setting that bar with our team of like, if you're too insecure to be taught, then you're because I've had staff members where I've said, man, this ministry or this thing is happening in my church, and I'm the lead pastor of this church. I hired them, and I feel like my hands are tied that I can't even speak into what they're doing because they're holding so tightly to what they want to do, you know, or they're so easily offended if I coach them on something that all of a sudden I feel muted as the leader. And that, when you think about that, that's insanity. You know, and I've realized it really does come back to pride and insecurity. And so just really teaching our staff, like, you have to be able to be taught, you have to be able to be able to be coached, or you can't stay. Because if I let 55 different visions run in this church, we're going to be in division, and that's going to be, you know, detrimental to what we're trying to do. So I've tried to, and so hopefully that's never a conversation where somebody hears that and they go, oh my gosh, I didn't know that. Like, am I getting fired right now? But it's in the culture of what we teach our staff. You know, that, hey, this is how we function, this is who we are, this is the direction we're going, nobody should be surprised. And then when you have that hard conversation, you can say, hey, if I can't teach you, then I can't coach you, and if I can't coach you, then I can't use you. But you need to start looking for something different so that you can get alignment somewhere. And I've lived that out. I mean, I've been in places where I've realized, like, oh, the grace of God is lifted in me being here, and it's better for me to leave so that the church can have the unity of God and the anointing of God than for me to stay out of my own security. You know?
What I found is that you can delegate some of that and not lose much capital by having good and accurate wage performance reviews on a real regular basis, and you can have your board members or personnel committee take care of those wage and performance reviews. Granted, the pastors that are over those ministries would have definitely a part in that, but it wouldn't necessarily have to be on your shoulders.
Right. Yeah. And we've done that with our staff annually, and we're realizing that's not enough.
Yep.
That really almost every 90 days our staff needs to know, hey, am I winning at my job? Am I in alignment? Am I doing what I'm supposed to be doing? So they're getting that constant feedback throughout the year. Because who wants to sit down once a year and it's like, oh, here's the review. All the things that you've missed on are about to come your way, you know, like. And that should be a small percentage, but so we've tried to even fix that and say, hey, let's be in a constant mode of coaching and bringing people along rather than just in these, you know, moments where now I'm making a leadership capital withdrawal by having to give you all the hard truth this November. You know, you're dreading it and I'm dreading it.
So it's just like communicating with the church. You're doing the same thing with the staff, constantly communicating.
Yeah. And so I've always tried to get in a rhythm of letting the church know where we're going, you know, what we're thinking about. I've tried to get in more of a rhythm with the staff of saying, because the moment something comes out of my mouth, people have processed it as if it's happening, right? And so I think my deficiency for a while was I would hold all my cards right here. And then once I thought it through enough, I'd go, ha! You know, 4 aces. And that didn't help people, right? They felt like I was dropping bombs on them. They didn't know what was happening. So now I'll often say, hey, here's what we're thinking about. You know, or I brought Pastor Bryce into our elder meetings, and he'll start sharing about stuff, and I'm like, you know, I haven't even processed this all the way through yet, you know, but he's like introducing, and I've tried to just lead by saying, hey, I'm going to tell you everything, but you have to be able to handle that it might not actually happen. Because it's better for me to process openly with you than to hold on my cards, but you can't get married to it, you know, until we actually say, hey, this is going to happen. I'm much more careful with the church because people they hear one thing, you know, like they're going to hear that we're changing Wednesday e-kids, and half the church is going to think we're changing Sunday e-kids because they're going to read half of the email, you know, and you have to fight for that clarity. I think Craig Rochelle says people don't actually get it till you've said it 8 times. You know, and so getting that with your church too, of like, just because I said it once doesn't mean anybody's gonna get it, and they're still gonna blame you, and it's gonna be a leadership capital spend for you. But if I'm making a change, or if I'm trying to get our church to get something, I have to say it 8 times. Like, I have to reiterate it and reiterate it and reiterate it over and over and over for them to actually grab onto it.
Your processing, because I'm a lot like you that way. I like to talk through the process. So you're doing that with your board, you're doing that with a specific team that you have?
Are you asking?
Yeah.
Yeah, so, yeah, what is the process? So I would say actually when there's like, Janae and I lead together, so every decision that comes down, Janae knows about it, we've processed it together, we talk about everything, and so a lot of the vision stuff is coming from the two of us, and things that we've processed. I meet with our leadership team every 2 weeks, so it's the top tier of our staff, you know. Maybe for you that is your board, you know, or maybe for you that's some lay people in the church that are the key drivers of ministry that's happening, key influencers, and so you have to determine who that is. And I would say our board is more in a place now where they want to be informed, but they only want brought deeply into like what they actually need to act on. Otherwise, our board meetings are a 3-hour talking session where I'm just dumping information. So always trying, so that's why I kind of give a portion of time for Bryce to just cut loose, and he can just fill in blanks for our elders that are happening in the operations of the church. And I know, so this is hard because we're all in different places and our churches are functioning differently. But you need to process like, hey, where am I at? Or you need to bring people in that help you process. Because I would say probably between me, Bryce, and Janae, the vision is produced. It's not just me coming down off the mountain, you know, it's, hey, here's where the vision is produced. So where is it produced in your life? And then who's that first sounding board that you bring it to? And laying out some ground rules too of like, hey, I'm gonna present vision. If you suck all the oxygen out of the room right away, I'm gonna feel defeated. I'm not gonna wanna run with any of this. I'm gonna think what I came up with is crappy and we're not gonna do anything. And so I'm trying to put people in the room who are like right side of the brain, like how high could the kite fly people, so that they can give life to here's what could happen and here's how it could be great. But then eventually I have to come to a different group, maybe it's a fuller part of the staff team or our elders who are more like holding on to the end of the kite saying, how is this actually gonna happen? And process through with them, hey, is what we're even talking about possible? How much leadership capital is it actually gonna cost? Is now the right time? You know, or are we trying to do something premature? Yeah. And are we at the right pace? You know? And is this really going to create the return that we actually want it to return? Because I would also self-admit that the first 4 years, I probably just liked breaking stuff for the sake of breaking stuff. And then I got tired of having to fix what I had broken. You know, and it's actually very hard as a pastor to come to a place where things are going really well and to just sit at the base of the mountain and enjoy that the presence of God is among you. And to just enjoy that. Instead, we like to be fixers of people and fixers of systems. So sometimes, you know, we're like going to get in there and just break it for the sake of breaking it so we have something to fix. And
That's insane.
yeah, but it's true, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
And I had a friend tell me, like, no, you have to sit at the base of the mountain and realize God's glory is right here. He's doing great things, and you need to just be okay camping. But sometimes we break stuff that doesn't need broken.
Thank you for that.
Yeah. I don't know if I answered your question.
Yeah, I'd like to talk to you more, but some specifics that I can't say.
Yeah, that's fine.
So.
I totally get it. I think, and it has to be one at different levels, right? And so if I were starting out all over again, I would say, hey, the first thing for me in the place that I was in is I need to really work with our board, and I need to build leadership capital, relational capital. And if I can't build it with somebody or they're sucking the oxygen out of the room, I need to have a hard conversation and be honest, you know, and really try to get that room to a space where I have capital with them. And then going on to saying, I also have to be building that with my staff, and then I need to be building that with my church. Because really, if you and the board, or you and the top tier of your leadership are in unity, then you can accomplish a lot. And even if you lose some people, you spend some capital, you're gonna build back because you're in unity, right? And you're gonna make a good decision. And so I think if I could go back, I would really emphasize building that individual capital before I spend it corporately, you know.
I wish I'd have known some of that even when I was pastoring Capital,
Yeah, right.
because that would have been very beneficial to me.
Yeah, and there's always caveats, right, where somebody, no matter how much capital you try to build with them, they won't come along, you know?
Yeah.
And I wish I would handle those conversations differently too, you know? But we all live and learn. So, sorry, I know it's all over the map. I'm trying to just give you
So good.
a whole bunch of different thoughts, but are there questions?
I have one.
Yeah.
So, kind of a weird question here, but I can't speak for all pastors that are out there, but I'm a relatively insecure pastor at times. How do you gauge your capital out of insecurity in a way? So what I mean is, I generally, as a pastor, feel like I'm like kind of downward. Like I basically feel like people hate what I do all the time. I don't know if anyone else, but I just feel that way. And I know that's not true, so I'm rational to know it's not true all the time. But how do you recognize where your capital is at when you're kind of balancing between security and vision? Does that make sense? I don't know.
Yeah. So I think like the first part of that conversation is, and I've walked through that journey too, of just like, man, I did some things out of insecurity, and everybody in the room believed in me and told me how awesome I was when they walked out the door, but I went home feeling like they're all just saying that to try to make me feel good, you know? And I walked through a 3-year journey of counseling, of just like, hey, here's how I'm dealing with some leadership situations, here's how I see myself. Pastor Scott is going to talk today, I think, about the lid to your leadership is how you view yourself. And the first time I did that exercise with him, I said, man, I just keep getting this picture that like we're in a farmyard and I'm the ugly goat over in the corner that eats all the trash that people buy a goat when they're cute and little, but then they get older and we're like, oh, we didn't want that goat. And like, why do I always feel like the goat? You know, not the greatest of all time, the other goat.
Josh, you go. You are.
Yeah. But really like wrestling with that and just trying to figure out why am I that way. And really the teaching that took hold of my heart that changed some of that was this reality that when Jesus was baptized, he had not called any disciples, he had not done any miracles, he had not started his public ministry, and still he's being baptized, and his father says, this is my son, whom I love, with whom I am well pleased. And in that moment, he gets God's affection, God's identity, this is my son, whom I love, and with whom I'm well pleased, and God's affirmation, and realizing God has given me his identity, he's affirming what I'm doing, and he loves me, even if I've not done a single thing for him.
That's good.
Like before Jesus had done anything. And I, as a leader, had to let that get into my heart of, that's my position with Jesus, no matter anything else, right? But then I think you have to go and you have to find trusted voices who both care about you, but also are future thinking and care about the church. And I think I said to our elders recently, like, hey, there's going to be some moments where I need to move forward faster, but I'm overly cautious, and I need you to help me. Like, I need you to say, Pastor Josh, let's go. Like, we can do this. You know, we have the credibility to do it because we get tired, we get discouraged, we don't see it rightly all the time, and just finding those trusted voices that, and so I've worked through coaches. Pastor Doug has worked with me even after he left. I worked with Troy Jones for a while. When I first started leading the church, Shanae and I just prayed and said, God, we're going to need a new group of friends to do this, and we're going to need a new group of leaders in our lives. And Jeff and Melody Leak and Rick and Wendy Lorimer came into our lives and supported us and encouraged us. And we have always fought to have coaches in our lives who are affirming and calling out God's identity in us and showing affection towards us so that we can continue to fulfill what God has called us to do. And so now Pastor Scott and Jenny fill that. And I was going around the room last night, I don't know about anybody else, and I was like, thank you God for Brad Lewis and Kel Thompson, Roger Loven, and this person, Scott Wilson, Winston Titus, all these people who have called that out in me even when I couldn't see it. And so I think finding your circle of people who are championing you is super important.
Josh, how do you, I'm not trying to over-spiritualize it, but I'm trying to figure out with the role of prayer in all of this.
Yeah.
Because with our board members, when we meet, talk about some of this stuff, we spend a lot of time talking about stuff. It's like, how much of this time do we spend praying together? I'm assuming that they're praying. But I mean, do you have a system in place, okay, we come together and this is all we do is pray, or is it within the context of, I mean, just what systems do you have in place for that?
Yeah, so I think I'm still navigating that even in our board meetings, because when I came in, it was more like, hey, are there any requests in there?
Yeah.
And so we kind of do that, and then the church kind of grew, and it felt like, okay, we're touching, and we're praying almost more for people in the church than even the needs on the board.
Right.
And so feeling like, okay, so then I kind of went through a season where I shared a devotional, and then I would just pray, you know, and I was kind of changing culture, but also not really knowing where I was going with that. And now, actually through P3, which I think Pastor Scott is going to do a breakout session on, he really teaches this idea of, hey, let's all together for a few minutes, let's pray in the Spirit, let's pray out loud together. But then I'm going to take it a step further, and let's not just pray or pray over specific needs, but let's hear from God. And then, hey, is there anybody that during that prayer time God spoke to your heart about something? Let's share that. Let's encourage one another. And then let's pray into that. And he'll lay that out. I think he has a book even on it. I think it's called P3. But I've realized, and I think I talked to our board about this, like, it's so easy to fall into a fear of man, or I've realized how much people fight for complacency even when they say, no, I want to move forward. And then, you know, they're undercutting themselves, trying not to have to change anything. And realizing, no, we have to be able to step in and say, what is God telling us to do?
Right.
No matter how scary it is, no matter what it costs. How can we not be afraid of people? Because every one of us is going to walk out of this room and we're going to have our different circles of people talking to us about the decisions that we've made. But how can we walk out saying, God spoke to us, we're in line with what he's calling us to do, and we feel confident when we walk out of the room? And so I think we're going to spend a lot more time doing that. Just opening our meetings, saying, hey, let's all pray in the Spirit, let's turn on a worship song for 3 or 4 minutes. Then let's share together what God is speaking to the room, right? And then let's have a couple people pray out and pray into those things, so that we as a leadership team or as a board really feel like, hey, God is leading us.
And I guess that's what I'm going to is okay, it's one thing that, okay, I've heard from God.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and again, with leadership gap, okay, so I've been in church for a long time, and board members will say, okay, yeah, let's do that. But I want us to hear from God.
Yeah.
And I'm just trying to, okay, how do we do that? So we know that we're all hearing the same thing. You're just not hearing what God told me. I mean, I'm the leader, yes, but we all need to be hearing here. And what's the format or system or whatever word you want to use to make that happen?
And so this is anecdotal, you know, and I'm kind of projecting this, but I think a lot of people in our churches and a lot of board members are very used to hearing from God in his word, but they have not been taught how to hear maybe like the prophetic word of God,
Yes.
or how to hear somebody else say, hey, here's what I think God is speaking in the room.
Yes.
You know, right now that we need to be led by. Can we pray into this for a second? I don't think we really taught that, you know. And so I think if we can empower not just our board, but our staff and our leaders to like really hear from God, and begin to share with one another, that would bring about that sense of unity of like, hey, the Lord is moving in our midst, and now we're all going to collectively put on our hat as board members, and that hat is only on our heads when we're in the boardroom together, because we function as a unit. We're going to hear from God, we're going to act according to the wisdom and the will of God, and we're going to have confidence in that. And then I've coached, hey, the minute you walk out of the room, the board member hat comes off, and you're a servant. Because this board only functions when we're together in unity, making decisions together. We're not all out there freewheeling our power, you know? It's when we're together and in unity. And so I think building that culture in the beginning of meetings is really powerful. Does that answer?
Yep.
Yeah. I think we're at time.
We are.
So thank you guys.
Thanks, Josh.
If you have more questions, I'd love to.
Yeah, well,